So I have some really exciting news that I have been dying to share with you all, and so I'm here today to tell you all about it, to give you some details. And before I tell you, I want to very quickly acknowledge that this news could be, I don't know if the word triggering is right, or just a little bit jarring to some of you who are dealing with infertility or anything kind of in that umbrella. If you've been dealing with that, I'm sure you can handle it. You've probably heard news like this many times as you've gone on your journey. But I almost just wanted to take a second before jumping in to acknowledge that, because I wish on my journey there was a little bit more acknowledgement of that. And so I just want to make sure that, everybody is prepared. And so I just wanted to say something before jumping into the news. You may have guessed it that I am pregnant. And Andy and I are so thrilled and excited and just over the moon ecstatic. I don't even know what words really to put on it or how to describe it. I'm just really excited and grateful. I think that's the biggest thing we feel is gratitude. And a lot of you probably know, if you've watched some of my videos, that we've been dealing with infertility for years and have done IVF. And also in the midst of all that, I got an MS diagnosis, which we had to navigate and made the whole process far more complicated. And so it just feels so exciting and so meaningful to be at this point, to be able to say we have a healthy pregnancy and that we are due in June. I don't know, we're just so excited. And I know I'm probably gonna say that a million times in this video and it might get obnoxious, but I'm just so happy. I also feel grateful not only for the fact that we're pregnant and that we're at this point, but also for the incredible medical care I received all throughout this process, for the people in my life who've been a huge support, to friends who are just the most incredible people, for my family. My family is just one of those families that's rock solid, that's always there for me, and I am so grateful for them, for the emotional support, all the support they gave. It made such a big difference. And so in a way, I just feel very lucky, and also I want to acknowledge privileged to be in this situation. A lot of people don't get to this point. A lot of people don't get to have this celebratory moment that I'm having, and I've had a lot of support along the way. So as I, got the news, I've known for a little while now, I started thinking about how am I going to share this on my channel, because I have talked about infertility. I'll link some videos below as well as above if you want to see any of that. And I also just thought about how I felt like I didn't come in contact with much content about what is it like for people who become pregnant after going through infertility and IVF. I mean, I'm sure it's out there and maybe I should have done a better job searching for it, but I almost wish there were more people just talking about their experience, even content creators on other topics. Like, quite often on this channel, I usually talk about simple living or minimalism and occasionally share life stuff, but I wish that more people were just open about their experiences. And I have found when I have heard people talk about their experiences, it makes me feel less alone and more empowered and more part of a community. And because I have this channel, have on some level a little power to normalize it and to try to destigmatize it by sharing my own story and my own experiences, and also maybe help other people going through something similar or who have been through something similar. So I thought I would make a video just talking about some of the things I've noticed about the process and also being pregnant now and what that feels like having been through IVF. I have to say though, I'm no expert. I don't think I'm the most well-spoken or eloquent on this topic. I also realize that my experience probably looks very different from a lot of other people's, and I'm not trying to speak for people in this category. I'm really just trying to express my own experience, and I might not do it in the most articulate way, and I just hope you can give me the benefit of the doubt and a little bit of leeway, and that I'm just expressing myself in hopes that maybe it'll resonate with other people, it'll bring more awareness to this, and just ultimately make people feel less alone. So the first thing that I want to share that I've noticed about this whole process is that I found that IVF was both harder and easier than I anticipated in different ways. So some ways that it was easier than I anticipated was just that I was worried this was going to be a huge medical ordeal that would be extremely painful, extremely unpleasant, just incredibly hard. And while definitely there are some difficult aspects to it, I definitely experienced some pain due to some complications, and it wasn't always easy. On the whole, the actual act of IVF, I feel like could be a lot worse. Yes, you have to do a lot of injections, and there's a psychological element around that, which I'll talk about in a second. And yes, you have to get some of these procedures done. There were aspects of the process that weren't as intimidating or overwhelming as I thought maybe they would be. At the same time, there were aspects that were harder, and part of it is just that the emotional journey is really hard when you don't know what's going to happen, and when you've had a lot of disappointment and feeling let down, and it's this chronic disappointment for month after month, year after year, and you watch other people become pregnant and celebrate that and have their baby and then watch their baby grow to 1 year, and you're just thinking, what is wrong with me? Why can't I have the same thing? And it's hard in that sense. It's also hard in a logistical sense, just the number of appointments and times you have to go in the IVF process. There are so many little ultrasounds, so many injections, and believe me, a lot of them are okay and not that bad, especially the subcutaneous ones, but then often you end up having to do the intramuscular injections, and there end up being a lot of those for each embryo transfer. And in general, quite often this process is something that feels very solitary and that you feel very alone in. At least at times I did, because at least for me, I didn't have anyone in my immediate vicinity that I knew was currently going through it. Like no one who lived near me, who was close to me, was going through it. And so it just felt like they couldn't really understand. And I kept most of the process mostly to myself and to Andy. Obviously, we went through it together, but it can be very hard at times and very isolating. A second thing I've noticed, especially about becoming pregnant after dealing with infertility and IVF, is just that I have felt like a lot of the big moments have been taken away from me. And maybe it's partially my fault for not being able to let go of the angst and pain of the infertility journey. But it's like when you're in that infertility IVF mindset for years, it's really hard to just snap out of it and to feel like, oh, I'm super happy now, I'm pregnant, everything's good. You're still terrified. You still don't know what's going to happen. And I think probably everybody who becomes pregnant and is excited about it maybe feels also an element of being terrified that it won't work out the way they want. So I know there's a certain level of that being a common experience, but I think it's definitely heightened if you've gone through years of being terrified and going through all this effort to become pregnant. When you finally become pregnant, at least for me, and I'm sure different people have different experiences, but for me, it wasn't just like suddenly super happy, overjoyed. It was still like, I don't know if this is something to be excited about or what's going to happen. I was kind of numbing myself emotionally for those years. And so when all the good stuff happened, I didn't feel, I think, the same ecstatic excitement I might have felt if the situation were different. Because I even think back to when Andy and I decided we want to have a family. I was so excited and hopeful, and I felt that kind of like butterfly feeling. But after having been through the infertility and the IVF and all of that, that feeling was somewhat lost in this process. And so when things did go well, it felt like I couldn't experience them in that way. I don't think anything was super wrong with me for feeling that way. I think it's understandable given what we'd been through. And I don't think it lessens how grateful I am, how deeply grateful I am to be in this position. It's not as if I don't feel that sense of being very lucky and of gratitude. It's more just that I couldn't feel the happiness in the same way because I had numbed myself for so long. And also, I don't know, just the process looked so different from what I had imagined in my mind. What is the stereotype that you see in media? You pee on a stick and you find out the positive result in the comfort of your own home. For me, I never got a positive result from peeing on a stick. I got a phone call because I got the information from a blood test that they took when I went in a couple of weeks after that embryo transfer. That's one example of many different situations that looked very different from what I had imagined. And so also when we got our first ultrasound, which was incredibly early because of the IVF, I think maybe it was at 7 weeks or something, I didn't realize that we were going to have an ultrasound. And so I didn't mentally prepare for it. At that first ultrasound, it wasn't this big emotional moment, especially because it was really still an embryo at that point. There wasn't that much to see, and I didn't know that I was going to have an ultrasound that day, so it was kind of jarring in that sense. And so that first experience, I felt like, of seeing the baby for the first time was sort of taken away from me in that I just didn't feel that same sense of excitement, and I wish that I could have. Now, on the positive side of that, most recently, Andy and I had our 19 to 20 week ultrasound, and that actually was the first time in this pregnancy, which is ironic, it's like halfway through the pregnancy, that I felt that sense of this is the first time I'm having a more, at least typical experience to what I had expected going in, where we knew what was going to happen. We were going to go in for this ultrasound, and it was this incredible experience. Basically 40 minutes of them just ultrasounding and sitting in this dark room with this TV in front of us, seeing, I guess, the fetus, but seeing our future baby and watching them measure the feet and the hands and showing the face and just all these different aspects of what will be our baby. I mean, it was so meaningful. And it was one of the first times that it felt like how I imagined it might feel like, and where I could get a little emotional and just feel that excitement and sink into it. And so I'm really grateful for that positive experience. But also telling people the news of being pregnant. You know, we've gone around telling a lot of people close to us in our lives about the news. It feels weird to admit this, but it kind of just wasn't a good feeling to have to tell people, and then to feel like on some level I had to fake happy to match the script of how you're supposed to act when you become pregnant, especially how you're supposed to act when you become pregnant when you want to be pregnant, or maybe when you have been going through IVF and infertility. It's like you have to play this role of I'm happy, I'm lucky, when inside I was still feeling super numb and even kind of sad, because the act of telling people reminds you of all the many times you'd been told about pregnancies where it was you were both excited for the person and thrilled, but then you kind of leave the situation and afterwards just feel like, well, why isn't it happening for me? And so it's often this kind of mix of feelings and mix of emotions, feels icky. And so that affected how it felt to tell people about the pregnancy and really took away, I think, a lot of happy, exciting moments for us, in that it was just way more complicated to tell people that we were pregnant, and it just wasn't the best feeling. This leads me to the third thing I've noticed in general in this process of IVF and then also becoming pregnant after IVF is just this feeling of being disconnected from people. I have felt so isolated in the process, so alone. It's just harder to connect with people about this topic in the same way. Again, maybe because of that numbing thing I think I psychologically did to self-protect or something, but it's just been harder to feel that sense of connection with people and sharing of joy or even of sadness. It's hard to connect with other people in the same way after this. And I think also a lot of this has to do with my MS diagnosis, because I was going through that around the same time as well. And to me, that was, at least in my experience, way more isolating even than IVF and infertility, because MS was just something that like totally changed how I experienced the world at all times, because I'm literally dizzy all the time and tired all the time. And so that also made me feel disconnected. So it's hard to disentangle what was MS causing the feeling of disconnectedness or what was infertility or IVF. But on the whole, I think throughout the last few years, I've felt far more just disconnected and having trouble connecting with people in general. More specifically with infertility, what's hard in a way is that it has felt like there is this club that I was never invited to, that I was not a part of. And not only was I not invited to it, but I was excluded from and kind of alienated by. And it's this club of parents, this club of moms. And a lot of people in my life who have been through motherhood or have been through pregnancy, I mean, they talk to each other a lot, and they talk to each other a lot in front of me. And I don't know, I mean, a bit of that is okay, but sometimes it got to be in some social situations where it was like a dominating force and a constant thing that was like harkened back to and talked about. And part of me likes that, in that I do think that caregiving is something that is underappreciated in society and is really hard and also alienating for people. So in a way, it's good that there is, at least from what I've seen, a culture of people trying to support each other in this really beautiful way. So I'm not trying to poo-poo that or something, because I actually think that caregiving and motherhood or being a parent of some kind is not something that's appreciated enough in society in many ways. But I also think that from my perspective, it felt like it was this club that not only was I not invited to, but I was kind of excluded from, and I was just not a part of it. And so now also when people congratulate me or give me advice on parenting or being pregnant, on some level, it also takes away my feeling good about that, in that I feel like, am I now perpetuating this exclusionary club that makes people feel alienated? And I'm very aware of that, and it feels icky. And so that feels kind of weird to me too, and makes me feel disconnected. And just in general, I mean, it's amazing how much judgment or unsolicited advice happens once you become pregnant. Just so many people telling you what to do, giving their 2 cents. And in some cases, when I'm really close to the person, that kind of thing is incredibly helpful, especially getting resources and information. It is so helpful, and I'm so grateful to those people. But also, there is this element of, in general, people having very strong opinions about caregiving and about pregnancy, and it is just a lot. But that probably goes beyond just infertility and pregnancy. That's probably also a pregnancy thing in general. A fourth thing that I've noticed, and I've probably touched on this even already in this video, is just this feeling of feeling stigmatized as someone who went through infertility and infertility treatments, and also a lack of information. In some ways, once you become pregnant, you're treated the same as everybody else, and you're in this kind of machine of pregnancy and of preparing for birth and preparing to be a parent. And there's no kind of acknowledgement that you might feel a little bit different having been through IVF or infertility stuff, or even more explicit slight stigmatization. And one quick example of this, though it's not by any means the worst example out there, but I remember at one OB appointment, there's a doctor who was covering for the doctor that I typically saw. She walked in without knowing me and just made a lot of statements about symptoms I was experiencing. Basically, I was talking about how I was really, really dizzy lately and just wanted to make sure everything was okay. And she didn't even know I have MS and am chronically dizzy prior to pregnancy. But at one point in the conversation, the OB asked me, "So you guys got pregnant the normal way, right?" In this way that assumed that we had, maybe because we're healthy seeming or something, or I don't know why she would assume that, because also I'm not totally healthy. I have MS. It also was just the way she said the normal way, and the way she said right, as if it was like this club that you're a part of. And I'm sure she was just trying to get the information and didn't think much of her phrasing or much of her tone. But somehow in that moment, it was like, no, we did IVF. And she could have phrased it differently. She could have said, did you use any kind of infertility treatments or anything to become pregnant? Or I don't know how you would phrase it medically. I'm not a medical doctor, but I don't know. I just think that could have gone very differently and could have been slightly less stigmatizing. And that's a really minor example in a way, like that's not that bad, but that's just one minor tiny little example of many things that have happened in this process where I have felt that people are basically communicating that I'm not normal, that something's wrong with me, or they assume I'm quote normal when things are a little more complicated. And then along with that, I've started reading a bunch of books about pregnancy, about childbirth, about also child care and caring for a baby. And It is so striking how all of these books feel very thorough and very well thought out, but none of the books I've read yet have even mentioned infertility. And these are really good books. These are often data-driven books or books that cover a lot of different topics related to pregnancy and all that. And it is striking how little it's mentioned. And sometimes I even just think a slight acknowledgement of like, oh, this might be a little bit different for people who experience infertility or who became pregnant after this or that procedure or IVF or whatever. I'm just kind of surprised that it's like once you become pregnant, you just erase the past and there's no kind of acknowledgement of that. When really, I mean, I had a lot of questions. It's like, if I went through IVF, does that affect the pregnancy at all? I didn't really get many questions answered on that as I consumed books and media around pregnancy. Anyway, I just wanted to share some of these concepts or things that I've noticed, not to try to overly complain or to gain pity or something. I mean, I feel very lucky and fortunate because I know so many people go through this process and probably have way more complicated, way more difficult of a journey than we did. And also, we're sitting here now pregnant and really excited, and I am incredibly grateful. And many people just don't end up having that opportunity even after going through years and years and round after round of IVF. I just do feel very lucky and very grateful. And at the same time, I also wanted to just give the space to acknowledge for those of you who went through infertility or IVF and, I don't know, are experiencing pregnancy and getting into pregnancy in a different way. I just wanted to express some of my reactions and that just the feeling of being a bit disconnected and feeling like people don't understand and feeling like you have to feign excitement at times because there's a certain script you're supposed to follow, especially after clearly you wanted to be pregnant so badly. Shouldn't you be grateful? And it's like, I am grateful, but also I have a really complicated mix of emotions around all this now because of everything we've been through. And I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that, again, maybe different people have a totally different experience and are not numbed at all or have different emotional reactions. But I just wanted to acknowledge that you might not always feel the way it feels like you're supposed to feel, and that maybe other people experience that too, and maybe you're not alone. I'll also acknowledge I'm terrified. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm new to all this. I don't know what it's like to be a caregiver, and I know I have a lot to learn. I have so much to learn, and that is scary too, but I'm also really excited. And also, on a personal note, it's very complicated because I feel very stressed out about having MS and all the symptoms I deal with daily while being a caregiver and having a lack of sleep and all of that. So I feel like there are so many layers I could chat on and on and on to you about of things I'm scared about, but I think I'll stop this video here just because this has been a lot. But I don't know, if you got this far, thanks for hearing me and listening to my experience. If any of you are going through something similar or even totally different, but you want to share your story, I would love to hear it in the comments below. I'm really grateful to hear other people's stories, and I feel like that sort of thing really builds my feeling of connectedness and not feeling alone. So I'm grateful for all of you who are willing to share your experiences as well. But the last thing I want to end with is just truly how happy and grateful and ecstatic and excited we are, especially at this point now that it's really sinking in more. It's just a really happy time. And thank you all for just being in this journey alongside me and watching my videos. And I don't know, I'm just excited. So anyway, that's all I've got. But thank you so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.